Hello and welcome. I'm Jay,
And I'm Robbie.
and you join us for episode 1 of Generations Apart, the podcast where we chat about gaming and technology across generations, from retro to next gen, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. On today's episode, we're focusing on virtual reality, specifically looking at the current state of the VR landscape. Before we get into that, though, Robbie, what piqued your interest this week?
Well, as you may have seen, it was CES a couple of weeks ago over in Las Vegas, and it's known for being the place to show off the weirdest of techs. So I thought I'd bring something a bit weird on today for our first stream, for our first podcast.
The
So
standard.
it raises the question: has health tracking gone a bit too far? So, for those of you watching this on YouTube, I'm sharing my screen of an article where Withings, the kind of device company that they often produce lots of health devices like smart scales, and I think they may even do watches and other kind of trackers and things like that. They've just released at CES, and James is already smiling because he can see what I brought up. Withing wants you to pee on its latest device. So they brought out a new pee tracking device that attaches to the inside of your toilet, and it's supposed to give you lots of different health metrics on your body based on your pee. I thought it was a really interesting use of your toilet time, because it's just wasted when you can get all these metrics. Look at that.
I often find myself peeing, thinking, if only I had more data. So
Absolutely.
what is the purpose? Who is it aimed at? I caught metabolic data earlier up there, but is there a particular condition or type of person that this is aimed at?
Someone who's looking to get a bit more insight into, I think it does things like your dehydration levels, for cycle tracking for women as well, is a big thing. But what I think is a bit weird about it is it's you can only sync it to one person. So I mentioned this to Christina earlier, and she was thinking, if you have a family in the house, you're going to have a row of these in your toilet if you want multiple
Yeah,
people
and
to use it.
how would you ensure that yours was tracking your pee?
You'd have to have a little Sharpie
I
marker on
mean,
it to say which one's
obviously
yours.
you got to aim it,
Yeah, I
because the
guess.
picture looks like it just kind of dangles freely at the front of the toilet.
It
It's
does.
a really weird device. I've got to be honest. I'm type 2 diabetic,
Yeah.
and although that's not a daily monitoring exercise for me, there probably would be some value in getting some sort of statistics on, the sugar content of my urine,
Yeah,
which is a really weird thing to be talking about 5 minutes into our first episode.
I know.
But I could see the value in that. But as you say, it doesn't really work if you've got a household full of people. If it can only be synced to one person, I don't want everybody else's pee statistics appearing in my app. So, do I have to take it out when I've finished my pee? Surely the point is it just stays in there.
Yeah.
And I noticed it's rechargeable. I'll
Rechargeable.
be
Type
honest.
C. They brag about Type C. Everything's Type C these days.
Yeah, it's not something I want to be taking out the toilet on a regular basis, though, is it?
No, that's very
And
true.
plugging that, you're not going to plug that into your iPhone charger or your iPad charger. You don't want that same cable going into your pee stick.
No, it's very true. So there you go. I thought I'd raise some CES
I like it.
weirdness. It's also $500 or €500. It says.
Wow. Okay. I'm not that
Um,
interested in my pee data.
but
That's
there you
really
go.
weird.
There you go.
I like it though. It's exactly the sort of thing we had in mind for this segment. So, I guess for future podcasts, the aim here is always to just bring something interesting to talk about. I went much more boring. I went for something more aligned to the topic of the day, which was around VR. So I pulled an article that popped up for me today around the much rumored Apple VR headset, featuring, in this instance, they're saying it's going to feature a 3D operating system that will also resemble iOS and can quickly switch between AR and VR modes to take advantage of gesture recognition. So this is all rumors, of course. No, there's no firm announcement on this. And I'll just read you a couple of excerpts from the article because I can't share this one on screen. So it says the long-rumored Apple AR headset could finally become a real product in 2023, but there are still many questions about how it will actually function. In a new breakdown of how the headset will work, Apple's attempt to take on Meta and others will rely on producing a great operating system experience as well as high specification hardware. There's there's stuff in here, all the usual stuff: hand and finger eye tracking, talk of the digital crown, which they've got now on all of the Apple Watches and all of the latest the headphones. I'm not entirely sure what Apple need to do to break the VR market. I don't think Meta have got the grip on it they'd like to have, and we'll get into all of that. But I did see, and there's many articles doing the rounds about what Apple's VR headset will or won't be. One of them suggests it will be £3,000. Now, if that's the case, I'd be blown away if it's that much. But they've got a history.
I was going to say, knowing Apple, that does not surprise me.
Yeah, if you look at something like what was it, the Mac Pros back in the day, those things can run you a serious penny if you bump up all the statistics. So I don't know. Interesting. I do think that the barrier to entry with VR in some instances is the ease of use, but actually how it sort of operates with your other devices. So given the iPhone's penetration in the market, I could see a synchronized iOS experience between your headset and your phones or your iPads being quite a positive one for the purposes of kind of getting you into the experience and making everything seamless, even something as stupid. And I saw another article earlier on about FaceTime and the way that they're looking at using photorealistic avatars, much like Meta announced at their recent Connect. Imagine a VR FaceTime experience. I mean, FaceTime is kind of, ubiquitous, isn't it? Everybody uses it. If you've got an iPhone, appreciate not everyone has an iPhone, but if you have, you're almost certainly on FaceTime. So again, being able to just go into the Apple Store, pick up the headset, link your Apple account, and off you go with all the experiences you're used to, but in a VR space. I thought it was quite interesting and relevant, but nowhere near as fun as a toilet pee data stick.
I thought I'd go a bit left field for the first one, but that's really interesting. I think it's going to come down to the ecosystem. Again, we'll get into it in a bit, but I think that's what Meta have really put a lot of effort into.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the Meta experience isn't bad, but I guess personally I use so few of Meta's other products that there's no kind of crossover between the experiences that I'm having. Whereas if I could boot up my VR headset and get a Windows environment for those who use Windows, or a kind of iOS environment, something akin to my mobile, I feel like that's going to be much easier just to sort of jump straight into and navigate. And if there's sort of parity between the apps, I want the internet Safari. Okay, I know that everyone's going to wince at that if you're into Chrome and everything else, but for the people who use these devices as they come out of a box and they don't go and customize the experience, I feel like just being able to hop into your headset and know what the internet is and know how to send a message and know how to make a call, that's really useful for people who are trying to adopt new technology that aren't into this stuff like you and I are. So I'm interested to see that. I'm kind of holding off buying my own kind of pro or corporate like headset. I've got the gaming ones, but we'll talk about that in a minute. £3,000 might just be a bit of a pill to swallow, though. I'll be honest, that will be seriously hard work to justify that. But
wasn't the HoloLens around that much when it was first launched?
It could well have been. Yeah, it might well have been. And that's the thing here, isn't it? We've got to bear in mind this is AR and VR, and I know that again it's all rumours, but Apple keep talking about AR, and I think that's where they're spending their time and effort. So if this is going to give you a better AR experience, and then you've got the VR as well, then it really depends on what that opens up, doesn't it? What are they expecting you to do with it? Because this is also separate to the rumoured glasses that they're apparently working on. They're not one in the same product. So, but again, it's all rumour, isn't it? So we don't know yet until they actually release something.
Exciting stuff.
It is. I'm excited. So let's get into the content for the episode. So we're talking about VR, general landscape of virtual reality. And I thought it would probably be useful, Robbie, just to give, for each other's benefit, but also for those listening, just to state where we're at with our current VR devices. What have we got access to? What have you experienced? Do you have any experiences that you can talk to? So I'll hand over to you to go first. What have you got and what have you dabbled with?
So I've got a Rift S, an Oculus Rift S that I can use with my gaming PC. Most of my VR experiences have been on the gaming side. I haven't done any of the ecosystem or the metaverse kind of stuff that I know you've been into. But I suppose a story on one of my first experiences with VR and a testament to how immersive it can be. I once went to a gaming convention in Birmingham, actually. It's the NEC, EGX, and they had a game that was on display to try out in VR. It was called Shooty Fruity, and one of my favorite VR games still. And the idea being that you are a checkout worker and you have to scan groceries while also shooting the fruit that are coming to attack you from the aisles as well. And the more you scan, the more weapons you get. It sounds really dumb, but it was so much fun.
Never played that.
It's a really good one. But what really threw me, and this was in front of a long line of people who were waiting to have a go of it as well, was I was trying to lean over to get these guns, thinking that there was this checkout counter in front of me, and I almost face planted this very expensive PC that was running it for the entire conference. The guy who was manning the stand had to actually catch me to stop me face planting into the TV. So it is very immersive, is what I'll say, and also very, very fun.
I think my first experience of any VR was the original Oculus dev kit, and I also saw that at an exhibition at the NEC, funnily enough, and it was before it had reached the kind of levels it's at now, or even the first release. It made me feel quite sick, I'll be brutally honest. And the graphics were really poor, but even then you could see just how amazing it was. And we put one of our friends into it who's not particularly into technology, and like he was just lost in it, completely lost in it. It's fascinating to watch. So for me personally, I've got a number of headsets now littering the room. I've got an original HTC Vive somewhere. That was the one that needed the room scale cameras and everything set up to use it. I guess the big drawback with that was exactly that it needed excessive hardware and lots of space to be able to use it. So I'll be honest, I rarely use that one. I'm not blessed. In the UK, we're generally not blessed, are we, with huge amounts of land or space with our homes. I'm not rich. I don't have a mansion. So, having clear space to have that set up permanently just wasn't feasible. So that's now in a drawer or a box somewhere in the house. I've got the original Quest, which was great when I first had it. A little disappointing that since the Quest 2 came out, they've basically made the Quest redundant.
Really?
In fact, in just the last week or two, they've now set a fairly short time period between now and when they're actually going to stop supporting them altogether. So the Quest 1 is basically dead now. It's not going to get any support, I think, after like March or April this year. I'd have to double check that, so don't quote me. So that's a redundant device now, but it's still really good for just playing some of the games that are on the Quest store. It can't run things like the VR workrooms and apps like that. So again, it's not really useful for some of the more modern stuff they're doing. It's a bit disappointing and a bit worrying, to be honest, because it's the Quest 1. We're on the Quest 2, and already the Quest 1 is redundant, which, that worries me for the future of the devices they're releasing, how quickly they're going to discontinue support or all that good stuff.
It's interesting, actually, just on there, because I think that does go to the ecosystem point, because you put a lot of trust in who you invest in, if it's Meta or if it's Apple or...
Well, that's it. You buy into the store, don't you? So, if Apple were to discontinue support for a load of their iPhones, all of a sudden your access to the apps you bought, and they do this, obviously, all hardware suppliers do it, but not after one version. If that was the case now, my iPhone 12 Pro, whatever it is, would be out of service and out of support because it's 2 generations old. So that's a bit worrying. What I will say is the Quest 1 is a really good PC VR headset as well. So like you use your Rift, I've got the link cable, so I can use mine connected to my PC. My PC is inevitably not on a par with yours from a power point of view, but it will run a number of PC experiences without too much trouble, which are superior to what you get out of the Quest devices because there's obviously more power. I've also got a PSVR, the original PSVR, which was great when it first came out. Really enjoyed that. Obviously, some drawbacks in terms of how it tracks. It's not inside-out tracking. We'll save that conversation for the new PSVR. But it used the Move controllers, which was really interesting because if you remember those Move controllers, they were PS3 controllers that were used to compete at the time with the Wii and the Xbox Kinect. It was to give PlayStation that kind of their movement devices. And they must have gone down. I think you could buy them secondhand in CEX for less than £5 device.
Yeah.
Until they announced the PSVR, and then they quickly started to go back up in price. I managed to pick a couple up fairly cheap. I think I paid about £10 or £15 a handset, But within a matter of days of that announcement, they had gone from £5 a device to near enough £30 for a pair, or more, and all because the PSVR suddenly resurrected them, and they didn't come bundled. So the PSVR just came in a box. You had to go and buy the. I think it must have come with the camera, although I'm not entirely convinced it did. I think you had to buy a camera as well, and then the handsets. Either way, can't quite remember. But PSVR, that was really good. Had a lot of fun with that. My sort of user experience stories, the fun ones, are kind of based in the PSVR. So my, much like your example of trying to lean on a table that wasn't there, my mother was in the headset one Christmas, and she was doing one of the gangs. I think it was the Gangs of New York, no, Gangs of London, or something like that. And she's in a room with an ornate desk in front of her, shooting at these gangsters. She couldn't shoot for toffee. She stood there for ages, over and over, reloading these guns, trying to shoot these bad guys. Obviously started to get a little bit tired because she was sort of crouching and then having to stand up to shoot. Forgot where she was, went to lean forward, and as you said, nearly crashed face first into the television, which was really funny. And then the other experience, which was my mother-in-law, she was doing the Shark Tank experience. Well, it's all on the VR World disc. It's all on the kind of bundled demo stuff. And she's gone down in this cage underwater. The shark is circling her. But the shark, it's a really easy experience to not get caught out by. All you've got to do is track the shark. As long as you just turn 360, the shark moves that slowly. It's not a surprise. She stopped tracking the shark. And then she suddenly realised she'd lost track of the shark, starts looking around, panicking to where the shark was. And it was all about timing. And she just beautifully timed the turn. And as she turned back to face the front of the cage, it was the moment where the shark lunged at the cage and tried to bite the door off. And she screamed, flew backwards, and took the headset off, never to put it back on again.
Amazing.
So PSVR it still remains, I think, a good headset, albeit a little bit fiddly to set up. And then the last thing, I don't own it yet. No one does. But I've got the PSVR 2 on pre-order, so I'm excited to receive that. Hopefully it will breathe some life into a fairly underutilized PlayStation 5. But everything I'm hearing about that seems to be really positive. Continual complaints about the cable. Most people just complain that you're still connected, but of course you have to be, because at the moment we don't have the technology, at least not mainstream, to be able to broadcast that kind of power from your PC or your PS5 directly into these headsets. And if they're standalone, as the Quest 2 suffers from, you're dealing with mobile chipsets, aren't you? And it just hasn't got the oomph to give you the experiences that gamers want. And actually, I'll be interested in your take on this perspective. And this is purely from a gaming point of view, so we'll come on to the other applications. I'm interested in what your thoughts are. I heard a prominent VR YouTuber the other day saying that VR games have peaked, I think he was saying in 2019, 2020. And the sort of, and I was like, what does he mean by that? That can't be the case. But then he explained his point, and I thought, okay, well, I'm not, still not saying that he's necessarily right, but a really interesting perspective. And his point was, in 2020, the Quest 2 released. Well, Quest 1, I think, would have been 2019-ish. Quest 2 went mainstream in 2020, and I think it sold something like 15 million units in the first couple of years. It's big numbers. And of course, everything then that's built for these devices has to be significantly reduced in terms of their power consumption, the graphical requirements in order to work on those devices. So his point was that sort of really good quality VR experiences and really good VR games in terms of graphics and immersion peaked in 2019, 2020, because that's the point at which developers pivoted to putting low powered games onto these devices and stopped pushing the boundaries of PC tech, which, when you look at things like the 4090 and what you could do with your PC, and I'm no expert in this sort of space, I'm quoting a piece of hardware there that this guy uses. I've seen what he can do on his PC in VR, and it's stunning, some of the stuff that I've seen him do. But of course, the Quest just can't get close to that. But if you've got 15 million of these devices in people's homes and much fewer of people playing on their PCs, then, developers are going to develop for the mass audience, aren't they? So their effort's going to go into the Quest. So it'll be interesting to see if PlayStation, with the VR2 and the power of the PS5, can kind of bring people back towards developing higher quality VR experiences and maybe combat a little bit of this the mobile chipset problem that we've got. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it actually reminds me of kind of developing for consoles and developing for PCs. So
I do
PCs.
wonder if you're going to take a jibe at my console love with this one.
I would never, Jay. But the idea of you have to develop a game for for PCs, it's wide ranging capabilities. Lots of different types of devices, but it's much easier to develop for consoles. But equally, with PlayStation games, you have to develop for PS4s still and PS5s, and there is the different levels of performance there as well. And same with the Xbox and the Xbox S. It's different levels of performance. And I think if they do focus on the lowest common denominator, the kind of least performance to get the best output for the user, then there is a risk that games will not develop as best as they can.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it'd
But
be
I think
interesting to see.
I think that's one of the good
what they
things
do.
about PC though, because a lot of the games they give you the option to boost the graphics. They'll have a low graphics version on PCs, and you can just up the graphics a lot of the time. But yeah, it is interesting. I also think that it reminds me a bit of a lot of these mobile games that have been developed based on PC games like PUBG Mobile and Apex Mobile now, and Fortnite as well, and how it's just a much simpler version of these mobile games. And while these mobiles are getting much more powerful, I think they're focusing on the simplicity rather than what's possible with these powerful games, and really just catering to the masses of what the general public have in terms of the power that's in their pocket, rather than the top end mobiles.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think most people who've bought a next gen console, I had both my Series X and PS5, and we're going off tangent here, but I had them at release, so they're 2 years old at this point. I still don't feel like I've played anything that feels proper next gen, and this is appropriate to the podcast. But and I think back the previous console generations, there was always, I mean, normally it came within the first few months of the console, and you were wowed by graphics. That's harder to do now, but there was normally something within that first year or so where you played it and you went, "Oh my god, that's amazing," and you knew that just couldn't have been achieved on the previous generation of hardware. I don't feel like we've had that yet for either console. Um, a lot of polished graphics and stuff like that, but we're not really seeing the true power of these machines yet. So maybe that's COVID's got something to play in there, and the longer development times and all that kind of stuff that you hear about in the press. But it does feel a little bit like these devices have been around for 2 years now, and we haven't really had that kind of must-buy experience. I mean, they haven't needed them, have they? PlayStation and Xbox for a long time were like hen's teeth. You couldn't find them anywhere, but they are starting to appear on the shelves more now, and they are going to need those console-selling apps. I read this something the other day, and again, slightly off at a tangent here, but we'll carry on. The Nintendo Switch, they are due to release the sequel to Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, I think it's called. And I read an article that said that Nintendo were now ramping up production on the Switch. I'm like, how many more of these devices can they sell? How many people have not at this point, who want one, got a Nintendo Switch? That device is 5 years old, and they're about to bring out another console seller and shift however many million, units of hardware that will go with it. And yet, you've got these two massive powerhouse consoles from two massive brands in Sony and Microsoft, who still can't find, one app that will really do that for them. And there's been good games, God of War, things like that, of course, but nothing that's regenerating interest in a 5-year-old console. I think it's unbelievable. But
I think it's also limited by the hardware that users are using. So both the new PS5 and the new Xbox can do up to 8K gaming, but nobody has an 8K TV. So I feel like they've almost released these consoles future-proofing themselves for when 8K TVs and 4K TVs at 120 hertz are much more common, because that just isn't around at the moment. So I think perhaps the development is they're still developing almost PS4 Pro style games, and waiting for when everyone has much more robust hardware that they can show off with some 8K games and 4K 120 hertz games. I know there's a few of them at the moment, but I think that's also part of it as well.
Yeah, and 4K does look great, but I don't know, it still doesn't have the leap that I remember standard def to HD doing. I remember putting my 360 onto a new flat screen TV from my old CRT TV or whatever the technical name is for it, and just being blown away at how good it looked. And that was just taking the console from its own inbuilt standard definition capabilities to HD, and it would have been 720p. It wasn't even that great, but it just looked amazing. Whereas I don't know, 4K, HD to 4K, there's definitely the difference, but it's not. Maybe it's just getting too good now. It's harder and harder to see, isn't it? But anyway, we've gone massively off on a tangent. Let's get back onto all things VR. That is my job as host of this episode. So, next thing we're going to talk about, sticking with the VR landscape and the tech side of things, is a quick talk about the Meta headsets that are currently, I guess, the most readily available on the market. There are others. And for anyone listening to this expecting us to talk about all things VR, we can't cover all headsets. So this is our get out of jail, our caveat for the episode. Neither of us are absolute experts in this field. We're enthusiasts, and we've got access to a certain number of devices, and we've experienced a certain number of devices. We're not going to talk about them all, but we want to focus on the Meta headsets, specifically the Quest 2 and the newly released Pro. I know you've tried the Quest 2 out and had some time in that headset. And I've been very fortunate recently to have access to the Pro and to try that out. I thought it'd be worth just having a quick conversation about the differences really, and the experience that we've had there. Before I kind of jump into my experience with the Pro, what were your sort of thoughts on the Quest 2 and your limited time with that headset compared to your own experience with the Rift?
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't think I would be that bothered by the cable between like the Rift S having to be tethered to your PC the whole time you're using it, and the Quest obviously being completely wireless. It was a very limited amount of time I used it, the Quest 2, but I did really enjoy the fact that I wasn't tethered in one space, and I wasn't worried so much about yanking out a cable at the back of my PC or anything. I think graphics-wise, they're very comparable. I think they were released around the same time, even, I think. I can't remember the stats on them, but to be honest, I think they were virtually the same experience between the two. Obviously, the controllers are almost exactly the same as well. But I really enjoyed it. I think they're quite immersive. I think sometimes you can see the pixels sometimes. I think the resolution could be better, and the frame drops can be a bit jarring here and there. But I think I'm a bit of an optimist when I come to these things, so I'm willing to accept that for the experience of VR.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think the pixels are a little more obvious. I will say, having now tried the Pro headset, that's less noticeable. So the new headset's obviously got higher quality screens inside it, and I'm just going to open up. Apologies for the purpose of the video feed. You won't be able to see this, but I've got an article that just compares the two really, so we can get into the tech side. Money wise, obviously there's a massive difference. So in the UK, the Quest 2, I think it was shipped the most basic level. I want to say it was something like £300 a headset. They did a price jump on that recently. It's now 400 plus for the entry level headset, and 500 I think if you want the next size of storage up. The Pro is 1500 at its entry level. I think that only comes in one size. I might have that wrong. The Pro, in fact, I have got that wrong. Oh no, it's only one size. I think it's just 256 gig, which is more storage than the default Quest 2. So you're getting extra storage there. You're getting the Pro controllers, which is something that does separate the two. And I will say the Pro controllers feel nicer in the hand. They do feel a bit weightier. They don't have that kind of weird sort of halo loop because they've got their own inbuilt cameras. So the tracking on them is more precise. I don't think I noticed it enough to justify. I think they're a £300+ price if you want to upgrade your Quest 2 to utilize the Pro hand controllers. You can actually buy them separately for the Quest 2. I don't think there's any value in that personally.
Am I right in thinking that they have their own CPU built into them as well? They've got their own like Qualcomm chips into each controller.
Yeah, they do, and they have to be charged, and so again, that's another slight downside. They do run through the battery a lot faster than the Quest 2 headset hand controllers. The docking station that comes with it, again, it's a nice to have. It's not the easiest thing to dock into. That is magnetized, but it's a bit fiddly to get it to actually lock into place. I think the biggest thing that I noticed with the controllers, and this is a downside, bearing in mind the price difference, I assumed that they would operate perfectly fine in a fairly dark room. And there's a reason why I had to do this. So I was playing in a room that was quite dark, and it just kept losing my hands. They just kept falling out of track. It kept reporting on the screen, can't track. And I was getting really frustrated with it. So I thought, I wonder if it is just a matter of light. Of course, they're using cameras to track rather than I'm not sure what the tech is in those halos. I probably should know that, but I don't. So I turned the lights on, tracking went back to perfectly normal. The reason why with the Pro I had to turn the lights off though is that the Pro doesn't fully seal around your eyes. So the Quest 2, fully immersive, it locks around your eyes. There's like that rubberized shield around the visors, and when it locks into place, it does cut out most, not all, but most of the light. I used to find just a little bit of light bleed around the nose, but I could live with that. The Pro, because it's designed for business use as well, doesn't come with out of the box a fully sealing eye shield. There's like little buffers for the sides, which are neat for kind of taking out the light coming in from the side of your view, but it constantly leaves this sort of thin trail under your nose. So you can always sort of glance down, see your feet, see what your hands are doing. That's great when you're kind of using it at a desk or you're using it in a room and you're trying to navigate your way around. If you're looking for immersion, and it's mainly gaming, I guess, for this, but any environment where you want to be fully immersed, you haven't got that full blackout, and you can buy it, but it comes at an additional cost. And I think it was something like £50 for a piece of magnetized rubber. And I was like, I don't think I want to spend that just to shut the light out. So I tried to compensate by turning the lights off, but then of course the cameras didn't work because they couldn't find what they were doing.
Didn't even think of that. That's really interesting.
No, I didn't until it started happening to me, and then I thought, well, that's not great. The visor is the lenses are much higher quality, so you do lose a lot of the pixelation that you mentioned, and you do notice that. Like the first time I wore them, I didn't really notice it. It wasn't until I went back to the Quest 2, wore that for a sustained period, then put the Pro back on and went, "Oh, that looks pretty." And I guess it's a little bit like we were just talking about that HD to 4K. It didn't blow me away, but I went, "Oh, that's noticeably sharper." Like I feel that looks better.
Yeah.
But I couldn't quite place why. You also get slightly wider field of vision, which is nice again. And I didn't notice. I never felt that was a problem in the Quest 2. It was only when I put the Quest Pro on and then put the Quest 2 back on that I felt like there was a little bit more sort of darkness around my eyes. So that was interesting. The comfort is it improved? It's different. It's uncomfortable for different reasons. So I used to find with the Quest 2, because all of the weight's on the front of your head, and the elastic strap just kind of basically suspends it, that I used to get quite a lot of pain in the back of my neck. I'm gesturing for the purpose of the camera. But yeah, everyone knows where the back of your neck is. And I used to find that made me feel quite sick. That coupled with a bit of motion sickness. I never had that with the PSVR because it has that crown, which it suspends the lenses off, which distributes the weight evenly around your head. The Quest Pro is somewhere in the middle, so it does distribute the weight. They've moved the battery to the back. But now, and I've got quite a large head, so this could be me, but I found it pressed a little bit on the side of my head, which was a bit uncomfortable, but most noticeably on the front of my forehead, where that weight was kind of sitting. And again, I'm gesturing for the purpose of the video here, so apologies to people listening on audio only. But it sort of sits on your forehead, and it just gets quite uncomfortable after about an hour. I find myself adjusting it and just kind of having to just release the weight a little bit, move it slightly, and then it gets a bit uncomfortable again somewhere else. So I don't know. It's really hard to advocate for. If someone else hadn't paid for it, I think I'd be really struggling to justify and to back up that expense. I'd be saying I feel like I've maybe spent badly, especially when the PSVR 2 is coming at £550. Granted, you need the PS5. I've already got one. But if you hadn't, that's another 500. So I know that's still not cheap. But I think, I don't know. I'll be interested, I know we're going to talk about it in a moment, to consider the differences between this and the other brands now coming to market. Because I feel like maybe, although the Pro was kind of cutting edge when it was announced, there's been a number of devices that have quickly followed it. There was the Pico something, I can't remember what the name of the Pico device was, but they quickly announced a Pro device. And they've got one that kind of competes with Quest 2 and the Pro. And then there was the most recent one, which I'm just going to quickly find, which I think you've got the link for, Robbie, if you could.
Next tab. I was just going to highlight, I've heard a lot about how uncomfortable the Pro is, the Quest Pro. And I just want to have a look through this article to see if there's states the weight difference. So the Quest 2 is 219 grams. And the Quest Pro is 722 grams, I think it says.
No, it's
Oh, it's 219 grams heavier than the Quest 2. Yeah. 722 grams is quite heavy to have on your face.
Yeah, and I think it's noticeable in the Quest 2. I do feel the discomfort, likewise with the Quest 1. And it is different on the Pro, but it's equally uncomfortable for its own challenges. So, and the other thing's battery life. So, as I mentioned, the controllers and the headset, neither one lasts as long as the Quest 2. Although the Quest 2 gives you about 2 hours of good battery life, the Pro will just about squeeze 2 if you're lucky. But with eye tracking turned on, using the pass-through tech, you are limited, and the pass-through is poor as well. I've seen people. I think we both talked about the Marcus Brownlee video where he was showing the overlay, and the screens that are represented inside the headset are not sharp enough to make them usable. They're not as good as a big 4K screen that many of us perhaps techies are used to. But then the pass-through is also not good enough to really properly use, other than for awareness of your surroundings. I've seen people try and sort of demo using a phone and stuff through the pass-through. You can't. I tried to use mine. You can't read it for toffee. The quality of the camera is not that good. And all this stuff will improve naturally as these devices continue to evolve, if they continue to evolve. But
it's interesting because I think partially the reason why they haven't got the sides blocking as well is it's almost hedging their bets for augmented reality. I personally think that, at least for business contexts, augmented reality is probably going to be king.
Yeah, and that's what they're aiming for with this, isn't it? That's why it's the Pro and not, the meta gamer. They're aiming specifically at the Pro market. I mean, the Kinect, if you watched it, was 90 minutes long, and there was some games in there. Don't get me wrong. There was 20 minutes or so of games. There was a lot about meetings, about collaboration, about Microsoft, about using your Excel, your Word, your PowerPoint in VR. There was a huge amount about bringing the kind of the avatar experience to life, making that more immersive. So they really leaned into where they see these being used, which is more for communication and work. And I get that, and I completely understand that's why the shutters are the way they are. I just don't know whether or not it would have been sensible to have included the full immersion sort of face tracker thing, or rather than the little side pieces that they stuck in the box. I don't think they add enough value. I'd have just said, we'll put the whole thing in, or not at all. Or the other thing they could have done is just provided you with a separate bottom bit, and then they would have all joined up nicely. Like, it wouldn't have been that difficult to add that in. It felt like a bit of a money grab to me, or an unnecessary exclusion. The other thing that's on there, you can see it on the picture that you're showing on screen, but for those who are listening, there's like a rubber cover that goes over the outside of the device. Again, useful if you're going to be taking this thing around with you. I don't think it's the sort of thing you just drop into your bag. It's massive. You're not just going to pop the cover on and throw it in your bag. The chances are you're going to buy a dedicated case for it, in which case that protective rubber is redundant. I'd rather have had the eye shield. But,
good point.
That's just me.
It reminds me of, not to hate on Apple, but the AirPod Max. You've seen the case for the AirPod Max.
Yeah.
That's a bit like that, in that you'd rather have a case, really, rather than a kind of...
Although that does perform a function, because I've got one, but we can talk about that another day. It does. It's a smart case.
Yeah.
Air quotes. But that's
got magnets in, right?
Yeah, and it basically tells the device to go into low power mode.
Yeah.
So like there's low power mode and then there's low power mode. Anyway, that's aside. Yeah. So anyway, we're not doing a full breakdown here. If you want to watch that, there's more than enough content online. If you want to hear these devices torn apart, but
we'll include the links to the articles as well in the notes for the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key takeaway for me was it's definitely an upgrade. Obviously, it's an upgrade. Was it enough for the extra 11 to 1200 pounds? I'm not sure it was. I don't think there's enough in it to justify that. Like I said, if it had been my own money, I would have been genuinely disappointed with that as a device. But anyway, let's have a chat about an alternative that you could spend a similar amount of money on. So very recently, HTC have come back into the game because they've been a bit light really on sort of really big sort of competitive headsets for a while, but they've just announced the Vive XR Elite, which we've got on screen now again for those on YouTube. £1,300 for this device, so a little bit cheaper than the Pro, still quite pricey. Only this one converts, so it does two things. It acts as a traditional VR headset, much like the Pro, but it also turns into a pair of, what do you call them, goggles or glasses? I'm not quite sure how to categorize them, but they convert. The strap, the sort of head strap, comes off, and you can wear them to move around more freely. So Robbie's just kind of letting some of the promotional material run here, but you can see, I think from the spec when I read it, it's very similar to the Pro. I didn't check for eye tracking and face tracking, so I don't know if we can find that, see if it's in there or not very quickly. I think a lot of the spec is very similar. There you go. There's the battery, the big battery coming off the back, and then you can sort of sub in some little ear clips.
I have to say, this is definitely the coolest looking headset I've seen.
It does look cooler. It does look cooler, and it looks more like a pair of goggles.
It does.
Let
me try and see.
But I don't know again. And again, they're promoting the sort of PC VR piece, which is an odd thing to promote because you can do that anyway with any of the Meta devices. Although I don't know whether this comes with that capability out of the box. Again, Meta charge you the princely sum of about £80 for a dedicated 5-meter high-speed USB-C cable, which is bonkers. Again, we're not going to do like a tech comparison here and a like-for-like breakdown, but I don't think from memory the resolution is massively different.
Yeah.
What I'm interested in is whether or not it's got face tracking, but it says headset tracking there, but I don't think it's got face tracking. Surely it must do. Again, depends whether they're hedging their bets, doesn't it? What they're looking for.
It has a lot of tracking cameras. Doesn't say what they're for though.
It does have lots of cameras, doesn't it? But they're assuming they're on the outside.
Yeah.
It didn't come up in any of the promotional videos that I watched.
Inside out tracking. Oh, that's
inside out tracking is just the.
It doesn't say actually, so maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, that's the controller's tracked area. Yeah, maybe it doesn't. I guess, is that a big selling point? The interesting thing with the Meta Quest Pro and the face tracking is that experience, that you're paying quite a lot of money and you're giving up a lot of battery power for someone else's benefit, because you don't actually see the benefit of having your face tracked. It's for the benefit of other people experiencing you in VR. So when I tried a couple of experiences out with a friend of mine, he was on the Quest 2 and I was on the Quest Pro, and I said to him, "Can you see where I'm looking? Can you, is my mouth and face expressions moving, more realistically?" And he said they were, and it was good. But I was like, well, I'm great. I'm really pleased that your experience of me is better. But that extra money that I've spent on that hardware is not benefiting me. And until it's standard in all the headsets, then, it was a disadvantage to me in that moment because I was playing poker. So he could see everything I was doing. My facial expressions were much more natural. Whereas actually, ironically, in that game, you probably want the opposite. You want your poker face. So
yeah, I bet your friend's poker face was unreal for that game.
I could have turned it off, but that kind of ruined it a bit. So yeah, I guess the reason for just including this as part of the conversation was just to say that this headset exists.
There's some interesting features. I don't know if you've done some digging into it, but they've got a couple of cool things that I noticed in a video that I saw. So apparently the hand tracking is fantastic compared to the Meta Quest Pro. Again, I'm not sure, there aren't many applications for it yet, but it's one of these things that if you can track hands instead of the controllers, that really makes it much more immersive. But it's not quite there yet, but I've heard it's very good. So that's an extra feature that I think you get with this.
Hand tracking is useful when you either need to charge the pad, the controllers, or you're just picking it up to do something quickly, say on Netflix, and you want to just sit down. And actually, the hand tracking is pretty good on the Quest Pro. I'll be interested to sort of read what makes it that much better on the HTC. Completely accept that. If that's what they're saying, then that's the feedback, isn't it? But I'd like to know what makes it substantially different.
Yeah.
I don't think you can do it, even though it tracks your fingers, you can't do much with the gestures. It's all pinch related, which is a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a bit more opportunity to do something there. But yeah, as you said, it makes it much more freeing. And if you could do a VR experience where you could literally grip something and you didn't have to press a load of buttons to make it do it, that would be really compelling.
Another really cool feature for those of you, myself included, who wear glasses, it has a feature where you can toggle your prescription as part of the lenses, and it's just built in. So that was a
Oh
really
wow,
cool feature.
that is useful, and I suppose if that's really beneficial if you're going to be using them in the glasses kind of goggle format, and maybe manoeuvring around a little bit more with pass through turned on or something like that.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
And then the last thing I noticed, if I can remember what it is. Oh yeah, I heard the pass through is actually really quite good on this. I thought I saw Marquez Brownlee chat about it in one of his podcasts, and he can actually read your phone. He can do text and stuff. It's not comfortable, obviously, but
Yeah.
I've heard that on the Meta Quest, on the Meta Quest Pro, it's not that easy, and things can be quite blurry, and it's by no means
Yeah.
something that you would use regularly. Again, it's more for surroundings, but I've heard you get a bit more detail, a bit more color.
I heard someone say this about the PlayStation VR in a video, and I thought they said the pass through is okay, but you're not going to use it to sort of answer a text message. You'd have to take the headset off for that. I was like, well, I don't think that was the intention. I don't think they're building these things so that you can just wear them 24/7. Like, yes, there will be things you have to take your headset off for. It's just to give you, like you said, the benefit of your surroundings. I can't remember where I put the controller down, or where's my drink, or who was that just walked into my room. Those are the kind of things that I imagine that's intended for, not so that you can just toggle between. I don't think we're there yet. I think that's where it needs to get to. I think the AR VR thing needs to get that good, but then the camera tech, the screen tech, the processor, there's just a lot's got to advance to make that work.
100%.
So you never know.
100%. I do think it's funny that is the benchmark, though, whether you can text with the headset on.
Yeah, I know. I mean, maybe that's where Apple wins out, because they'll just let you text inside the headset.
That's true.
It'll just ping in your headset. There we go. It's interesting, though, isn't it, that I know that Google back in the day had a couple of devices, didn't they? When it first sort of started to come
Google
to
Glass.
take off. No, they had Google. That was their AR product, wasn't it? But they have. I'm sure they had a VR product, but it was one of those. It wasn't slip your mobile phone inside the case, although I think they did do something like it.
Yeah.
Because they had
the Google Cardboard,
didn't they?
Yeah.
They did bring out a headset. I thought, I got that wrong. I could have sworn they did. I just think it's interesting that two of the biggest mobile providers with the biggest sort of mobile operating systems isn't in this game yet. And I guess likewise Microsoft. I know they've done the HoloLens, but they're not in the game either. And at the moment,
it's interesting that they've suddenly backed off. They were leading the professional side of virtual reality and augmented reality for the longest time. But
if you believe the Meta presentation, they're in bed with Meta.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see whether that sort of stacks up. So again, from a gaming point of view, there was a lot of talk about the idea that Meta, Xbox were going to enable Meta devices on their consoles and let you do effectively the equivalent of PlayStation and PSVR using your Xbox and your Meta headset. That was a rumor. It's never come to be. But I guess the sort of the worry with all of this for me is that we've had 3 now Pro headsets announced in the last 3 or 4 months. We've just seen the Quest 1, as I mentioned earlier, get killed. That's now redundant. So, that's going to be a bit of dead hardware. How fast are these things going to keep moving? How big are the leaps going to be? I think at the moment it's a really risky space to be getting in on and spending that kind of money. Okay, £300 or £400 on a Quest 2. It's not small change, but it's not the end of the world. As long as you have a good time with it, you probably don't feel like 2 or 3 years later when it's redundant or underpowered now that you've lost out. You spend £1,500 on one of these headsets, and then in 2 or 3 years' time they replaced it and it's redundant because things are moving so quickly. I think for a lot of people you would feel quite aggrieved, and it's a reason to almost back off that investment and hold off until some sort of standards are set. And you touched on it earlier when you mentioned the operating system and the ecosystem. What's the Vive ecosystem like? What's the Meta ecosystem going to be like in a year time? What are the rivals that are going to come out? If Apple does get into the market, does Android follow suit? And then are we going to have iOS and whatever Android's now called? Educate me. Are we going to have those headsets and operating systems competing? I don't know. It's really tricky to be out. If someone said to me today, "What should I buy?" I'd be really hard pressed to tell them to invest in one of the Pro devices. Not because they're not cool, just because unless that person had lots of money to throw around and could afford to waste £1,500. I feel like the Quest 2 or or equivalent is still the safe bet if you want to experience VR without going, hell for leather all in.
Yeah.
Unless you know you're going to be in them all day every day, to try and get £1,500 of the value out of these devices feels like a stretch at the minute.
Yeah. What I think is interesting though is the different industries that are playing in this field. So you mentioned, obviously Apple's bringing out one soon. Yeah. That's typically, I guess they're mostly picturing their mobile users, I imagine, using it with their iPhones. So they're competing more with like the mobile space. So maybe someone like Samsung would also hop in from the Android space eventually. But then it's started out with Microsoft doing the professional stuff. Then you have the gaming players, like I think Vive is owned by Steam, isn't it?
I don't know. It's HTC, isn't it? Isn't that the brand? I don't know.
Oh, I'll have to look into that. But I think a lot of the gaming hardware companies as well are now playing in the space, like Sony as well, as you mentioned. I wonder if Microsoft will bring one out for Xbox as well. But it's interesting because it's across many different industries and they're all competing. That's
interesting because Microsoft didn't react when the PSVR came out, which didn't sell badly. I don't think. I've not seen the numbers, but I don't think it sold badly. The PSVR 2 is an interesting one. So when they first announced it as PlayStation, as an owner of a PS5, you could register for pre-order early access, which is stupid, but you could basically register in order to be able to get an invite to be able to pre-order when pre-orders became available before the general public. And I assume it's all to try and stop what happened with the PS5s, which was scalpers just sucking them all up and then selling them at twice the price. I got an invite and I went nah, and I didn't do it. I deleted the email and I carried on. A few days or a week or so went past, maybe a little bit more, and I got another email, just a more general email inviting me to pre-order one if I wanted one. Again, I kind of deleted it and thought, no, I don't really want that, don't really need it. And then I found myself getting, it sort of started to play on my mind, and I thought, actually, maybe I do want one. But I deleted the emails and I thought, I'll just go on the website and have a look. And I went to the website and I was able to pre-order one without any, any need to go through any kind of authentication process, no sort of special privileges, just, I assume as any other member of the general public could pre-order one. And that was good because I got what I wanted, but also it worried me slightly because I thought, well, if you were anticipating the kind of volumes of orders that meant you were offering a pre-order special access, and then a couple of weeks later I've been able to freely pre-order one on your website for launch release, does that mean that you didn't achieve the levels of pre-orders that you hoped? Has it not taken off in the way that you hoped? Did the first PSVR get enough people interested and sell enough that actually the second time round, people a bit like me who've had them gathering dust to some degree has decided that perhaps they didn't need the second one? I've jumped in eventually, and I'm sure they'll bring some big games out. But what I wanted to talk about on the PSVR 2 today was actually more to address the games lineup. And if you could just throw that up on screen, Robbie, forgive for those who are listening, but I'll talk through it anyway. So the PSVR 2 is being lauded at the moment for having lots of VR games. I saw lots of positive press about the amount of different launch titles that were coming and how great that was. And that is good. And for me, I've personally ordered the Horizon Call of the Mountain digital release because I wanted to have that. That's the kind of flagship experience they're promoting at the moment. But if you scroll down, there's some good and there's some bad in here. So first of all, I wanted to touch on the good. So Gran Turismo 7 for driving enthusiasts has now been confirmed to be all but fully in VR. So the PSVR version of Gran Turismo, whatever the number was, lauded VR capabilities, but it actually turned out to be very limited. I think it was something like 1 or 2 tracks and a handful of cars. And what everyone really wanted was the whole game to be enjoyable in VR. That looks like that is the case for Gran Turismo 7. They've said that the only things that are missing are split screen, which of course you'd expect. I mean, that's asking a bit much, isn't it, to have split screen multiplayer and VR all in the same thing. So it seems like if for those driving enthusiasts, then it might give me a reason to jump back in, if the headset's comfortable and it's enjoyable to play, I haven't had a Gran Turismo game for a long time. I don't think I've properly got into Gran Turismo since Gran Turismo 3. So I might be tempted to jump back into that. So I think that's good. And that's an exclusive. That's obviously something that really sells the console.
Yeah.
Then you're starting to get into stuff that is already available on other VR headsets. So if you've only ever played PlayStation VR and you're in that world, then of course this is all going to be great. And you're going to put this headset on and go, wow, so much better than my PSVR. But if you've been like us dabbling with other headsets along the way, actually a lot of these games are already available elsewhere. So having owned a Quest 1 and now having access to the other devices, a lot of these games are already accessible to me. So No Man's Sky, you can play that in VR on the PSVR. So
really?
I don't, okay, it's going to look better, run better. And that's a game that's continually getting upgrades. So you're going to get some benefit there. But actually, I can already play that. So it's not a new experience, is guess what I'm saying. It's not unique. And this is coming back to what we were saying earlier about that next-gen feel. Where are the games that I can only experience in this exclusive device I've paid a fortune for? And at the moment, there aren't that many. Switchback VR, I don't know much about that one. That may well be an exclusive, but I'm not sure. Tales from Galaxy's Edge and the Star Wars series, the Moss and Moss Book 2 are both already available elsewhere. Cities VR, I don't know about. I've got to imagine that's available on PC VR, but I'd have to double check that.
Gotta be.
The Jurassic Park Aftermath collection, by virtue of the fact that that's a collection, I've got to assume that's already available elsewhere and it's been bundled. Tentacular, I don't know about.
The only thing I'd say is I think that maybe they've just got a lot of confidence in their hardware, and although you can play it on other devices, you can't play it with a PSVR.
Definitive experience here. Yeah, potentially. I mean, and that might well be true. But the thing, Moss, for example, Moss 1, and I've got to assume Book 2. I must admit, I don't know whether that's available on the PSVR, but Moss was a big seller on the original PSVR a number of years ago. That's not a new game. That's an old game. Pistol Whip, already available on the Quest. Might look a bit nicer, I guess. On Pistol Whip's very good, by the way. So I'm not slamming Pistol Whip. Really fun game. It's a bit like Guitar Hero meets John Wick. So it's like a rhythm-based shooting game where you have to duck, dodge, shoot various bad guys in time with the music. It's really quite hard, but I got a bit into that the other night. Really liked it. There are a handful of games here that I think are exclusives, and again a few that are available elsewhere. But I guess my point was there's a lot of stuff here that isn't exclusive to this headset. I know you might expect that, but there's also stuff here that was on the old headset, which just when they're saying that that they released, like Tetris Effect is a bit further down, that I had on the PSVR. So I played that. Thumper is a really old VR game at this point. Creed Rise to Glory, again, that's readily available. So there's stuff here that is, if you're already into your VR world, I don't know, it's only any good if you're not playing outside of the PlayStation sphere. If you're only in the PlayStation ecosystem, then yes, there's some new stuff here, as well as some old rehashed stuff. But if you've been playing in VR elsewhere, you may already have some of these experiences or have had the experience elsewhere. And I just think that's a little bit of a shame. I'd like to see a little bit more. There's still time. It's a month away at this point, broadly. And I'm enthusiastic about it. So I'm not trying to sort of throw shade here at PlayStation. I'm excited for the launch, but I'm excited for a handful of exclusives. There's a lot in here that I really don't care about.
Yeah.
What I will say, and this is really sad, there's one game that I am going to buy, and it's called Kayak VR Mirage. Have you seen it?
I haven't.
Okay, you should go and look at it. It's beautiful to look at. Like graphically, it's stunning, but it's quite literally the most sort of like chilled out experience where you go on a kayak journey through beautiful glaciers and jungle rivers. It's on there somewhere. It's a bit further down. I think.
See it.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So there's a really nice. I mean, watch it off record, but there's a really good little video that goes with that. And again, I think that's had a bit of an up-res for the PS5. So, I guess my point was it seems to be a bit of an interesting mix. There's a lot of repetition in here from other hardware, including the PSVR. What will be interesting, and I don't know if there's an answer to this yet, is whether or not existing PSVR owners who've got some of these games on their PSVR will get the up-resed versions for their new devices, or what will probably happen is you'll be expected to buy them again.
Are they up-res though for the new headset?
Don't know. I don't think there's that much information out at the moment. I mean, maybe if you go digging. I haven't done that kind of level of research yet.
Because it does remind me of what you were speaking about before with the PS5 coming out and waiting for that. You have a handful of exclusives that came out when it was launched, but waiting for that one game that's really going to show off the power of the console. Perhaps it's the same with the launch of this. You get a couple of new exclusive games, but it's really relying on its old library with a new experience. Because it's early days. And when the PS5 first came out, I think there was maybe one exclusive that was available on launch, one or two.
Well, their big commitment was there weren't going to be any, and then they changed their mind and they pivoted. And they've done that a few times. PlayStation have been a bit naughty in the next gen. I know we talked the other day off camera, but we talked about my experience of buying the all digital edition and feeling a bit burned by it because of the lack of third-party CD keys that you can now buy, the price hike on the digital marketplace. The digital games are always £10 more expensive than anything that goes into stores. Even though they try to put the RRP at £70, most retailers knock it back down to 55 or 60. Yet the digital store is locked in at 70. So you're paying more, you're getting less because you don't get the physical thing anymore. It was a big mistake to buy the all digital, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But we'll see if that changes. But I think you're quite right. I think the big flagship games here, the ones they're pinning their hopes on, are Call of the Mountain, which is obviously Horizon is a PlayStation exclusive, with the exception of the first one now that's come to PC. And I think the Gran Turismo, as you can see, I mean they're top two on their website. Those are the two that they are pinning their hopes on, I think. And if they're good, then they will shift units because Gran Turismo is massive. Everyone loves Gran Turismo. It's lost a bit of ground, I think, in recent years to Forza. It takes them an awfully long time to release new ones, but it's still the premier driving game. And Call of the Mountain looks amazing graphically.
It does look
fantastic.
It's
everything you want. Yeah, it's everything you want from next gen. And we'll try and play that on stream when it comes out as well. I'm sure I'll settle that up so that you can watch me make a fool of myself in a headset on camera. But
I'd love to see that.
Those are the two that I'm most excited about. Kayak, again, just for the beauty of it and the sort of placid, kind of passive experience. But I don't know. I was a little bit disappointed. I read an article that said, 30 titles at release. Got all excited and then looked at it and sort of thought, well, at least sort of 50% of this already exists somewhere else, if not more. And a good chunk of this was on your old headset. So I'd like to know what that upgrade path looks like. I'd be happy to revisit some of the PSVR games I've got, because they're locked on that device now, and I did buy a number digitally. Will I ever sit down and set that device back up again? Probably not once the VR2 comes out. So it would be nice to have an upgrade path, but based on experience with PlayStation today, I suspect they'll just want to sell it to me all over again. And I'm not sure that any of those experiences were that big a deal to me that makes me want to do that. But we'll see.
Moving from PS4 to PS5,
yeah,
your digital downloads for PS4, were they portable to PS5?
Yes.
So there is hope.
There is hope, but I'm sure I read something that said that there isn't going to be compatibility between the two. Because obviously they'd have to all be reimagined, wouldn't they? Because the controllers are different, the hardware is different. And one of the nice things I do, which while we're on the last kind of tech point, but have you had a look at the foveated rendering, the technology that the PSVR uses?
Is that so it only renders the pixels that you're looking at because it's got eye tracking, so it saves graphic performance? Yeah.
So they can get away with they're doing something like, I want to say it's 4K, but I could be wrong, in the headset. It's something apparently visually very impressive. But it's only at the most sort of direct point that your eye is seeing, and then they use the foveated rendering to effectively lessen the quality of the picture and the resolution the further away from your eye that it goes. And apparently that's really impressive. Not without its glitches, I think. Some people who've seen it at conferences have said that it's not completely perfect, but that could be ironed out if it's software related.
Yeah. How impressive is that though for technology? The eye tracking is so cool, seamless that it can and the speed render
that wows me. That's the thing that gets me. I know they do that to a degree in video games, don't they? So I know that Horizon, for example, the first Horizon used a similar concept. So wherever your character was looking, and this is probably common across all video games, but the sort of the cone-like field of vision that you have, is where the maximum rendering takes place, and then everything behind you is kind of just not bothered with.
Yeah.
And then as you swing the camera, it kind of loads all that stuff in frantically to sort of make sure everything you're looking at looks pin sharp. And that's sometimes where you see texture pop in and stuff like that. So I guess there's a precedent for it, but there's just something tracking where the analog stick says someone's looking versus where their actual eye is moving. You think about the speed at which you can move your eyes, that's incredible.
It is wild.
So I'll be interested to see how that works. I'm still excited for it. There's the one thing I did get really excited for when I watched a video the other day, and I hadn't realised this, is that they've got all of their PS5 haptics from the controller in the controls for the PSVR handsets. Yeah. So you've got the adaptive triggers, there's haptics in the headset, so you get a bit of a tap every so often on the back of your head when something's not going your way. And obviously all the 3D audio and stuff sounds fascinating. So definitely something to be excited for. I just want a few more exciting games, or give me a roadmap. I don't need them all now because I don't have the time. Give me a couple now, and give me like a handful of releases to look forward to throughout the year that tells me that they're really going to double down on this.
Yeah.
That's what I'd like to see. But anyway, we have gone slightly long. Our aspiration is always to make these episodes about an hour. So Generations Apart, episode 1's gone ever so slightly over. But Robbie, is there anything else before we bring episode 1 to a close that you wanted to talk about in the VR space for now?
That's all from me. Just very excited about all the VR tech that's coming out.
In that case, then, that's all for this episode. Thank you for sticking with us through to the bitter end. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and all good podcast services so you don't miss an episode. You can also check us out on Twitch at Jay and Robbie, where we stream 3 times a week and play a variety of games from the old to the new. For now, though, I guess see you next time.